Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, we're going to go over the loving yet complex relationship that is involved when one person is fearful, avoidant, slash disorganized, and the other person is dismissive, avoidant. And this was requested, and I wanted to go over some of the many attributes that occur, particularly with this relationship. Typically, when I'm talking about a fearful, avoidant with this particular context, it is actually anxious leaning, fearful. Normally, when I'm talking about fearful avoidance, it's usually dismissive leaning. Right now, I'm going to talk more about fearful that is leaning anxious. Now, of course, it can be also if it's a fearful leaning anxious and fearful leaning dismissive as a couple as well. But it's usually going to be where someone has an anxious side more prominently and the other person has a dismissive side more prominently. And the very first challenge, which can be both good and bad, so it's a challenge, but it's also a positive, is actually since they are both avoidance, they are able to give each other space, but they also both struggle with communication and trust. And so this is why this can be pretty complicated, which is why especially avoidance in their early healing journey or when they're younger, when they're not as understanding of their attachment issues, they tend to be with anxious partners, particularly for this reason, because anxious partners are actually pretty good at communicating. Not all the time. Of course, they have their own struggle as well, but they're better at communicating when it comes to more stressful situations. They're able to stay calm during certain moments more than avoidance. I'll try and explain that. Avoidant individuals, they bottle emotions up and then they have this kind of crash out explosive moment, and fearful avoidants do that even more. Anxious individuals, they're able to have emotions. Sometimes it's hard for them to put the emotions away, but they're definitely able to show up emotionally. And often they're not emotionally charged unless they're being kind of pushed aside continuously. So, an anxious individual, if they're in an environment where they are loved and treated well, they are actually able to communicate much better than avoidance of both types, fearful and dismissive. Fearful, avoidance, and dismissive, even if their environment is without too much triggers, they still struggle with communication. It's something that they struggle with inwardly because they don't express their emotions. And so this is why it's a struggle, because although they're able to give each other space, which is why a lot of them do really well together, they also struggle with communicating. So sometimes they both will be in this type of moment where they don't know how to resolve it. And they're also trying to manage their own emotions, manage their partner's emotions. And sometimes it can lead to a lot of resentment down the line, especially for the fearful avoidant. But both of them might not know how to resolve it. So what do you do if this is the case? Often what can be helpful is to work towards labeling emotions in a very minimal yet direct way. So if you're a dismissive avoidant and you're really needing space, a lot of times what dismissive avoidants will do is they'll shut down, they will crash out, they will sometimes even, if they're struggling with anger, they will subconsciously use their anger to, unfortunately, make the other person put their emotions away. That's not healthy, but these are patterns that I see. Sorry about the camera shake. And what you're actually asking for, if you're a dismissive avoidant and that's what's happening, you're just asking for, I need a break from this conversation like right now, right? And so communicating that and understand that your partner's probably not going to be able to give you that right away. Don't get mad at them. Continuously remind them that that's what you want, because you can't change things right away either. So don't expect that from them. And with a fearful avoidant, what you need to do is start understanding what's bothering you before it bothers you to such a point you can't handle it anymore. Communicate slowly and mention, I don't like that you do X, Y, and Z. I appreciate all that you do. Is there any way that we can adjust this? Can we talk about this at a time you're ready? Both of you guys realizing what you're actually feeling instead of pretending it's not there is the key to resolving this issue, okay? The next one is, since that you are both avoidants, there's usually a power struggle that is much more obvious with couples like this instead of couples that are anxious and dismissive or anxious and fearful. Now, the reason why is both individuals don't like giving up control, but they also don't want to be the one that's calling all the shots either. So it's a very confusing case. Anxious individuals, they don't like being the one calling or leading the relationship, but sometimes they end up doing it because they know someone has to lead the relationship. Dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance, they don't know how to because they're too afraid if they do that they'll fail. And so what they end up doing is they pull away or they try and especially dismissive avoidance, if they're not healed, they'll try to indirectly drop subtle hints that this is how they're feeling without having to directly communicate. And this builds resentment on both sides. So with fearful avoidance, they're probably doing the same thing. So both of them are being very indirect and they're having a power struggle. Let's say the fearful avoidance says, hey, I don't want to hang out every weekend. I'd rather us hang out on weekdays, but I want to hang out multiple times. And the dismissive avoidant says, no, I don't want to hang out multiple times. That's too much for me. And I also don't want to hang out on weekdays because I'm working. I'd rather hang out on a weekend. Right? So now both of them are stuck in their ways. They don't want to compromise, and they also don't want to give the other person what they want. And sometimes what ends up happening is the fearful avoidant might go ahead and give in, but they don't actually want to give in. So they're actually resentful and holding that in. And then it kind of has this emotional outburst, to which then the dismissive avoidant gets really afraid they're going to lose their partner, and then they give in temporarily. And so what ends up happening is they both are giving in temporarily, but none of them are actually fully giving up the power. And so what needs to happen is both of you guys need to have a conversation of what needs to be done, even if it means both you guys have to compromise what you don't want to give up, okay? And so this example I just gave, that means that likely what's going to happen is dismissive avoidant says, let's hang out on weekends and only once a week. Fearful avoidant says, I can't do weekends, let's do weekdays and multiple times a week. A compromise could be once a week on a weekday, right? Or 2 days of the weekend and not at all on the weekday. And both of you guys have to give in. Does that make sense? Okay. The next issue is that fearful avoidants tend to struggle with low self-worth, and dismissive avoidants tend to have sometimes a higher self-worth. And so what ends up happening is the dismissive avoidant ends up not taking as much blame, and the fearful avoidant takes too much blame. And so what ends up happening is once this starts happening, the dismissive avoidant realizes after, shoving the blame onto the fearful avoidant continuously, they realize, oh, wait, it's my fault. Let's just say that's the scenario. Dismissive avoidant did something, they keep blaming the fearful avoidant, and the fearful avoidant accepts it because they struggle with self-worth. But what happens is the fearful avoidant is also very detached from people, so they don't trust anyone. And so they take the blame, but they don't struggle with the accountability at all. A lot of fearful avoidants are pretty good with accountability, especially if they're leaning anxious. They're just like, you know what? It is my fault. I'll take it because I don't trust anybody to take the blame anyway. So, I'll just do it myself. And so they take the blame. Dismissive avoidant shoves the blame onto the fearful avoidant. And then what ends up happening is as the months, years go on, they start realizing, wait a second, the dismissive avoidant has some fault in that too. And then the dismissive avoidant feels guilty, and that bumps into their shame wound. And they want to repair the relationship, but the fearful avoidant is already so pulled away and so distrusting of the dismissive avoidant because of this dynamic that it's really hard to repair the relationship at this point. And so what you can do is, if you're a dismissive avoidant, start learning to take a little bit more of the blame and start realizing it doesn't mean that you're a failure or you're not good at relationships. And fearful avoidance, don't take blame so easily and just put it all over yourself. It's not healthy. Communicate and say, okay, I hear that I did that, but I also want to point out, don't you think this is part of the dynamic as well? Point it out. It doesn't have to be all the time, but just subtle. Both you guys don't need to change right away. It's okay. But it's something that needs to be changed eventually because it's going to create issues in the relationship, okay? The next one is dismissive avoidants tend to feel frustrated and judge when the fearful avoidant doesn't trust the dismissive avoidant, and the dismissive avoidant tends to start pulling away because of this. And the fearful avoidant takes the dismissive avoidant as pulling away as disrespectful. And so now the fearful avoidant is either crashing out or distrusting the avoidant further. And so what needs to happen is both you guys need to accept the fact that both you guys had trauma and triggers before the relationship. Don't take everything so personal. Sometimes things happen. Trust the process and believe that you guys can work it out and work towards proving the other person that you're going to stay and make this work no matter how difficult the circumstances, okay? And the last one is fearful avoidants actually tend to struggle with affection and love, especially receiving it, actually. And dismissive avoidants take that as disrespectful and rejection. And so what ends up happening is then they stop giving affection, and then the fearful avoidant feels even more unappreciated. And so if you're a dismissive avoidant and your fearful avoidant partner is struggling to accept your hugs, kisses, whatever it is, be patient with them. Don't be so angry, and understand that it's not personal. And fearful avoidant, understand that you might have to reassure your dismissive avoidant partner and say, I really like that you hug me or kiss me. Sometimes I'm just uncomfortable because of X, Y, and Z. It has nothing to do with you. I still find you attractive. I still care about you. So these are some of the complexities that are much more common if it's a fearful and dismissive couple, okay? I hope this video was helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.